So let me explain to you why ground troops has to be sent.
Okay.
All right. Okay. So in phase one of this war, which started February 28th, which lasted for about 6 weeks, the intention was to decapitate the regime. And you do that by striking Tehran, and you do that by striking the military bases and installations throughout Iran. It's what the Americans call shock and awe. And the point is to force the Iranians to call uncle. But that's not what happened.
To give up.
To give up, basically. Because what the Iranians did was they responded by attacking US bases throughout the GCC. They closed off the Strait of Hormuz, and they rallied their people, okay? So rather than surrender, the Iranians basically doubled down. Okay, that's phase two of the war. Now we've gone to phase three of the war, where Trump has basically decided that decapitation does not work. And so what Trump's going to do is he's going to impose a naval blockade on Iran's naval blockade, right? And so the question then is, if Trump understands that decapitation does not work, then using game theory.
What's game theory?
Game theory is the belief that all the world is governed by rules and incentives. And once you understand the rules and incentives, you can predict how people behave, because people will always behave according to their best interests. So in geopolitics, the nation states are individual players, and each nation state is trying to use its resources and its advantages in order to pressure other nation states to obey it. Okay? So Trump recognizes that the Iranians have closed off the Strait of Hormuz, but not only that, but the Iranians can also use the Strait of Hormuz to finance the war, meaning that now they're forcing ships to pay a toll of $2 million in order to cross it. And so this is a huge advantage for the Iranians. And so Trump has said, no, I'm going to blockade your blockade, negating Iran's advantage over the Strait of Hormuz. So if we think about it, again, using game theory, I want to discuss what the Americans will do in order to force the Iranians to capitulate. Okay? So I would say there's a 3-point strategy. The first strategy is economic strangulation. You basically destroy the state's capacity to finance the war. And there are 2 ways that Iran is financing the war so far. The first is using oil exports, right? 90% of Iran's oil goes to China. And this is Kharg Island. Okay, this little spot here is Kharg Island. And this is where Iran will export 90% of its oil overseas. That's the first mechanism. Second mechanism is the Strait of Hormuz, where the Iranians now can collect tolls, right? So what you have to do is you have to eliminate both of these finance mechanisms. You can close off both with a naval blockade, okay? So that's strategy 1. Strategy 2 is you need to create as much chaos within Iran as possible. You want to turn this fortress into a prison. And the way you do that is by stirring up ethnic tensions in the country. So if you look at a map, ethnic map of Iran, what you will discover is that the Persian people are primarily in this area, in the middle of the country. But if you go to the borderlands, okay, the border areas, it's primarily ethnic minorities. And there are 2 ethnic minorities in the country that have always been problematic for the government. The first problematic people are called Baluchis here in southeast Iran by the Pakistani border. They have a history of insurgency against the government. Okay. Second people that have been problematic are the Kurds, who are primarily in the northwest of the country. So if you are the US government, if you are the military, your strategy is to establish forward operating bases in these areas. A forward operating base is a spearhead of the military where you insert ground troops to hold an area
Okay, so
in order to resupply, in order to push further into the territory.
okay, so a forward operating base would be the US putting troops into the northwest and the southeast, and then using that as a way to move forward into Iran.
No, you don't want to move forward into Iran because it's too large. You don't have enough forces to move into Iran. What you want to do is this. You want to establish forward operating bases in these areas in order to arm and train ethnic insurgents
Okay.
that you can also finance as well. And you do this because you want to turn them into cannon fodder. You have to force a response from the Iranian military, right? So if they come in with the army in order to quell these rebellions, that's great because now you can use your air power to decimate the Iranian military. Your problem right now is the Iranian military is hiding inside mountains. And so you want to force them out in the open. And so you want to create as many points of tension in the country as possible to force the Iranian military to respond. Right? Does that make sense?
Uh-huh.
Okay. And now your third strategy is to strangle the capital, Tehran, because that's where the political elite are. It's about a city of 10 million people. And the way you strangle Tehran is you deny them three things. You deny them water, electricity, and food. So you attack power plants. You attack reservoirs. You attack railways that bring food into the capital. And when you do that, these 10 million people in Iran will now oppose the government and demand a political settlement because they need food, water, and electricity to survive. Right?
Is there a government?
Right now, there's a debate as to the true extent of leadership in Iran.
Because Trump's recent interviews, he's saying he's claiming that the leadership in Iran are fighting themselves, but then he's also saying in other interviews that they don't even know who they're dealing with.
Exactly. Iran has a very unusual political system in that it's a theocracy. It's a religious government. It's run by clerics called the mullahs, in theory. And then there's a parallel system, the state apparatus, that actually takes care of day-to-day bureaucracy. Okay, and that's secular. The mullahs control the morality of the country. They also control foreign affairs. So basically, this is important because Iran has two parallel military structures. You have the military, but you also have the IRGC. The IRGC are only loyal to the mullahs,
Which is the religious part.
Exactly. All right. So you have this divide in the country where the IRGC see this as a religious war, as a crusade to kill the great Satan, and they want to fight to the death.
And the great Satan is?
The great Satan is the American Empire,
Okay.
which is the source of the misery that Iran has been suffering for the past few decades. And the IRGC, not only do they see America as the great Satan, but they also see this as a global conflict because they have proxies that support their beliefs, including here in Lebanon, Hezbollah, including here in Yemen, the Houthis, and of course in Palestine, Hamas. Okay, and before, Syria was also part of their axis of resistance, but Syria has been toppled by the Americans and the Israelis. So the IRGC see this as a religious crusade that is global in nature. The political leadership in Tehran sees it completely different. They see this as a conflict primarily between America and Iran, and they want to reach a political settlement as soon as possible. And so, in other words, these ceasefire negotiations, it's really all for show. Because at the end of the day, even if the Americans gave the Iranians everything they wanted, the IRGC still controls the battlefield, and they would not surrender or seek peace terms lightly. Another problem in this situation is the IRGC practices something called the Mosiaak strategy. Mosiaak. The idea of the Mosiaak strategy is, okay, you know the Americans are the most effective military ever in human history. You know that they practice shock and awe, decapitation. So how do you respond to that? You respond to that using decentralization. 31 provinces in the country with their own command and control that is localized.
So basically they have 31 different armies that have their own leadership.
That's correct, okay? And when you do this, it's a fight to the finish.
Why did they do that?
They did it because the Americans possess the most sophisticated surveillance technology in the world, meaning they can easily identify the leadership and they can easily track you down and kill you. So the only way around that is to decentralize the leadership and spread it all around the country so that the Americans cannot kill everyone.
How does the central government orchestrate 31 different armies in Iran? How does it get a message out to them? I heard Peter Hegseth make a comment in one of the interviews saying that it takes some time for the pigeons to get out to the armies. And what he was saying basically is that when the ceasefire was called and there was still some missiles flying, he was basically saying that's just because it takes a long time to tell the 31 different armies to stop.
The reality is that given the Mosiaak strategy, there's actually no way to coordinate these 31 different military operations. Because the Mosiaak strategy was meant to fight to the bitter end. You do not stop until you completely control the Middle East, and the Americans have been forced out of the Middle East, and Israel has been humbled.
Okay.
So let's go into the specifics of what the Mosiaak strategy is. The idea is that they have an eschatology. Okay? So an eschatology is an understanding of how the world should be and how we move towards this world. And for the Iranians, their eschatology is that Iran, in order to reach its true potential, needs to be master of the Muslim world. It needs to displace Saudi Arabia because Saudi Arabia is too aligned with the United States, which is the great Satan. Mecca and Medina are under the influence of the great Satan. Because why are there US military bases in Saudi Arabia? So this war, from their perspective, it's a great opportunity to overthrow the corrupt leadership of Saudi Arabia, but not only Saudi Arabia, but the entire GCC, overthrow the corrupt governments of the entire Muslim world, and install governments that put God, Allah, first.
So they're not going to quit Iran.
This war, once it starts, can only lead to World War III.
That's a strong statement to make. As a probability,
Okay,
what probability would you assign to that claim?
I would put it pretty high, anywhere between 80 to 90% probability.
So that's certainty.
Basically certainty, yes.
Explain to me how that happens.
Okay, so we need to step back and appreciate that there's a global dynamic going on, okay? And we need to appreciate the grand strategy of the different players involved. All right. So what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to explain to you how each nation sees itself in the world. Okay. And to do that, I'm going to use a chess set. Okay.
Okay.
All right. This is the king. This is the political system of the United States, which is democracy. And there are certain strengths and weaknesses to a democracy. Democracy is vibrant, it's creative, it's flexible. But its ultimate weakness is polarization, where today, the different political factions refuse to get along, and this may break out into civil war, okay? So the way you defeat the United States is not to conquer it. You can never conquer the United States. The way to defeat the United States is to force it into a civil war, which then kills the king.
To get its people to rise up against the leadership.
No, you want the Democrats and the Republicans to form different factions and fight a civil war.
Okay.
You want to create so much political polarization, the different elite factions take up arms against each other.
Okay.
So this is the political system, okay? The democracy. Now let's look at the queen. What's the queen? The queen is what I refer to as the grand strategy of the United States. How the United States can maintain its control over the entire world. And the grand strategy, it's already outlined in the National Defense Strategy, right? Let's create Fortress America and then create chaos throughout the entire world so that we can sell everyone weapons and resources. Okay, that's the grand strategy, right? All right. Now, once you have a grand strategy, you need to implement this grand strategy. So you need attack vectors. All right, the attack vectors are the rook, the bishop, and the knight. All right, so let's go over the three major attack vectors of the United States. They are, first of all, America's technological supremacy.
So these are basically the tools that they use to attack others.
Exactly. In order to achieve their grand strategy. All right, so aero supremacy, right?
Which is the planes and the stuff like that.
Then you have the US dollar, right? Because the US dollar allows you to finance everything, and everyone wants the US dollar, okay? So that is the second attack vector. Now, the third attack vector is propaganda. Meaning the United States controls the world's most powerful media, including New York Times, CNN. And as such, they can control the narrative of the world. Okay, so these are the three major attack vectors. Now they use the pawns. Now, pawns are weapons that they can sacrifice in order to achieve the grand strategy. And in the case of the United States, the pawn are the allies. Meaning, I hate to say this, but the UK, Europe, South Korea, and Japan. Okay? And also the entire Western Hemisphere. This is the Americans, okay? The people who are most opposed to this grand strategy of Americans are the Russians. So let's go over the Russian system. In the Russian system, the king, the political system, is an autocracy. And in autocracy, it's good because it allows for coordination. It allows for decisiveness. It allows for resolve.
Long-term thinking.
Exactly, right? That's Putin. What's bad is if this guy dies, there's a succession crisis, right? So basically, once you topple the autocrat, then the system itself breaks down. Okay, so that's the Russian system, right? For the Russians, the grand strategy is something called the Third Rome strategy.
The Third Rome strategy?
Yes, okay? So the people in Russia believe that they are the true successors to the Roman Empire. And previously, there were two Romes. There was the first Rome, then it moved to Constantinople, and Moscow is destined to be the third Rome. And what makes Moscow interesting is that it wants to unite the entire Christian world under its leadership. The main philosopher for the Third Rome strategy is Alexander Dugin, who in 1997 wrote a book called Foundation of Geopolitics. And what he said was this. What he said that if Russia is to defeat the Americans, it needs to build alliances throughout Eurasia in order to negate American sea power and air supremacy. All right? So what are the attack vectors for Russia? Okay, the first attack vector, the size of the country makes it almost invincible. So think about to World War II, Operation Barbarossa. The Germans went into Russia with 6-7 million men, and it didn't get very far. Okay, so the terrain is very important. The geography is very important. Then you have the Orthodox religion, which is meant to galvanize believers into supporting Russia. The third attack vector is artillery. So Russia has the best land army in the world. And we're seeing that play out in Ukraine, where a combination of Russian artillery and drones, it's devastating the Ukrainian military in Ukraine. The pawns for Russia are its soldiers. So Russia is able to sustain many, many casualties in its military. If you actually go and interview Russian soldiers, they are probably the bravest soldiers in the world. They are literally not afraid to die for what they believe in. Okay, so this is the Russian Third Rome strategy. You can see how it conflicts with the Americans.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now we go to the Israelis. Jerusalem, the capital, it's a mixed system, meaning it's both democracy as well as a theocracy. And it's good in that the Israelis are very creative, but the fundamental weakness is the division within society, where Tel Aviv and Jerusalem don't get along. Okay, so that is the political system of Israel. The grand strategy of Israel is called the Greater Israel Project. So the Israelis believe that the entire Middle East belongs to them, from the Nile to the Euphrates, because that's what it says in the Bible. This is what God, Yahweh, promised Abraham. So their intention is to conquer the entire Middle East, including Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, even parts of Turkey. Okay. Now let's look at the attack vectors for the Israelis. The first attack vector is Mossad. Mossad is the most powerful intelligence agency in the world, in that it is able to infiltrate and undermine different political systems.
And Mossad, for anyone that doesn't know, is their secret service.
Basically, yes.
Their spy system.
Second attack vector for the Israelis is the Jewish diaspora, because Jews do business everywhere around the world. And Jewish businessmen work very closely with Mossad. And as such, they have influence in a lot of places that they shouldn't have. And the third attack vector is the Bible. Why? Because if you're a Christian, and there are many Christians who believe this, you believe that the Jews are God's chosen people. So if you look at what's happening in the Middle East, all this conflict between Israel and Palestine, a lot of this conflict is being supported politically in the United States by a group of people called Christian Zionists. And these are Christians. They're not Jews. They're Christians who believe that Israel should achieve the Greater Israel Project because this is part of God's plan. And the pawns for the Israelis are basically everyone else, okay? So a lot of the hardware underpinning the global IT infrastructure is being controlled by the Israelis.
If you love the Diary of a CEO brand and you watch this channel, please do me a huge favor. Become part of the 15% of the viewers on this channel that have hit the subscribe button. It helps us tremendously, and the bigger the channel gets, the bigger the guests.